Hello and welcome to the Waltham Forest Early Years webinar on behaviour support. Today we will be looking at behaviour and how the environment can impact this. We will be exploring and understanding more about specific behaviours with regards to special educational needs and disabilities, and we will be exploring strategies and tools on how to positively manage behaviour. To begin, we need to consider what is behaviour that challenges. So behaviour that challenges looks different to all people. There are not a hard and fast set of rules that constitute behaviour that challenges. The general consensus is that behaviour that doesn't meet the rules of the environment is challenging behaviour. This could be quite broad and includes not wearing appropriate school uniform or not using a knife and fork to eat, all the way through to aggressive and dangerous behaviours. What we term challenging behaviour is a personal construct, and it varies significantly from person to person. At some stage in our lives, each and every one of us, irrespective of age, will display challenging behaviours in order to ensure our needs are met. The difficulties people with autism experience in addressing their own needs may account for any challenging behaviour that they present. So I want you to start by thinking about some of the behaviours that you are currently dealing with or have dealt with. What is challenging behaviour for you? What does it look like in your classroom? Keep that in mind while we continue to discuss behaviour that challenges. So children on the autistic spectrum and children with special educational needs and disabilities will have differences in these areas. These are the areas of difference. So they will have differences in social understanding, such as understanding other people's feelings and social behaviours, and this is needed to support friendship and relationship development. So they will have difficulties in these areas which can make relationship development difficult. They may have differences in sensory processing, which is how we perceive sensory processes. They might be hypo, which is low sensitivity, or hyper, which is high sensitivity. They may have different responses to touch, taste, smell, hearing, vestibular and proprioceptive information. They may have differences in information processing. So this is differences in perception, understanding concepts, generalising, planning, predicting, managing transitions, passions for interests and absorbing information. And they may quite significantly have communication differences. So there may be differences in expressing and understanding communication and language, and have a wide-ranging skill in this area. So they don't generally, children with special educational needs don't process information in the same way as their typically developing peers. This can then cause anxieties for the individual. So considering the 4 areas of difference and the anxiety that these differences can cause in children with special educational needs and disabilities, it's important not to think of behaviour in isolation, but to realise that it is a form of communication. The areas of difference for children with SEND or special educational needs can result in high levels of anxiety, which may result in behaviour that challenges. It's really important for us to remember that the behaviour is a message. They're communicating with you that something is not working for them. The behaviour may not be considered appropriate, but we need to understand the message behind it before we can find any way to support it. And this is a really, really important message, especially with young children. Typically developing young children may not have fully developed language skills, and they can't make their needs known without crying or having a little stamping of their feet. If children have got special educational needs and disabilities and they are processing information differently, and they are not able to express their needs as clearly as their typically developing peers, then the anxiety can build. And it's the building anxiety that results in the behaviour. So it's our job as practitioners to work out what that behaviour is, what it is that they are trying to communicate with us through that behaviour. So this is a quote from Sarah Hendricks. She is an autistic adult and an autism specialist. And she says, "Autism is not a behaviour. It is a way of thinking and understanding the world which results in behaviour. We must always try to understand why the person may have responded in the way they did by working backwards to find out the root cause. There will always be one, and it will always make sense in their world." So this sums up what we were just saying, that they are trying to tell us something, and it's the only way they know how. It may not be appropriate, and we do not understand what it is they're trying to tell us, but they are trying to tell us something. So it's our job to unpick the situation. What is going on under the surface? What are they trying to tell us? So this is the behaviour iceberg. So looking at behaviour like an iceberg, there is not very much visible above the surface of the water, but below the surface there's a lot going on that we can't see. So on the surface, what is going on? What is the behaviour? What are we seeing? Is it screaming? Is it crying? Is it kicking? Is it hurting ourselves? And then below the surface is the why. We can't see this, but this is why it's happening. So what are these why are these behaviours occurring? So above the surface, what we're seeing is anxiety, upset by change. They might show different behaviours to usual. It might be special interests that they can't let go. But going on underneath, why? What's going on underneath? Think back to the 4 areas of difference. How are they processing information? What are their communication skills or their sensory differences? They're trying to make sense of the world. They might be focusing on an attention to detail, or it's got to be the need for sameness and something has changed. We need to have a look and see what's going on underneath. So take a minute to pause this video and have a little think, either by yourselves or in your groups, and think back to those behaviours that we asked you to think about at the beginning, those behaviours that challenge that you're dealing with currently. Now consider what is being communicated. What are they telling you? Do you always know why the behaviour is happening and what is going on? Sometimes we might know why it's happening, but feel that we can't do anything about it. Other times we simply don't understand the root cause of the behaviour. So pause the video now and take a step back and have a think about why that behaviour might be happening. Do you know the reason? Even if you feel that you can't help it, sometimes we know exactly why a child is angry or upset, but we can't do anything about it. Do you know why? So when the cause of the behaviour is not obvious, there are tools we can use to try and help us work out what is wrong. So these are some of the tools. So the iceberg is what we just discussed. We can see what's going on above, but maybe we need to think about what's going on below. An ABC chart is an antecedent, behaviour and consequence chart. If you, using the contact details at the end of this webinar, you can ask for one of these if you need some. So on an ABC chart, we log what's happened before the incident, what the actual behaviour is, what's going on, and then the consequence, what happened afterwards. So sometimes we can tell in the antecedent what's going on beforehand, what it is. So if these charts need to be recorded really carefully and regularly, and we hope that it will identify patterns in behaviour. So you might see that it's always 11 o'clock, and that might be when someone walks past the window, or it might be the same time that a particular member of staff leaves the room or arrives in the room, or a bell might sound somewhere else in the building. Some things might be really obvious, other things are less obvious, but keeping charts will help you to see that. Make sure you put as much detail as you possibly can on the chart, including who is in the room and the time of day. Frequency charts, we will have a look at both of these charts in a minute. Frequency charts are what they say they are. It's a frequency and occurrence, so they're time framed. So how many times does the behaviour occur in this time slot? How many times does the behaviour occur in the next time slot? And then we have the motivational assessment scale. Now, you may or may not have heard of this. It's a questionnaire designed to identify those situations in which an individual is likely to behave in certain ways. From this information, more informed decisions can be made concerning the selection of appropriate strategies. If you Google Motivational Assessment Scale, you will be able to find a PDF that you can download and use. Again, you must be very specific with the behaviour. If a child displays kicking at times or biting at other times, you need to pick one of the behaviours and focus on that. And then you can repeat it for the next behaviour, but don't confuse the behaviours if they don't happen at the same time. So here is a frequency chart. You can adapt this to fit any way you need it to fit. If the behaviours aren't occurring in 30-minute patterns, but they're occurring every 10 minutes, then change your timings. Likewise, if it's hourly, make it fit what you need it to fit. But it's important that you do keep them every day consistently so that you can identify patterns, because often you will find there is a pattern. And then we have an ABC chart. So when the cause of the behaviour is not obvious, there are tools that we can use to work out what is wrong. This is one of them. So antecedent is what happened before. So do include your setting, what happened, where you are, who's there, what room you're in. Again, you might see patterns in areas. It's every time you're in the playground, or it's every time you're in the hall. In your antecedent, what happened before? Did child A and child B play the same game every day? Is child A missing that day? And then the behaviour. Again, be specific so you know what's happened, and then the consequences. What happened? Did anybody get hurt? How did they calm down? What did you do to bring the situation to a close? Both of these sheets, the ABC and the frequency chart, are available by contacting me using the details at the end of this presentation. So what to do in a crisis? It's important to monitor the behaviour and work out the root cause. Using some or all of the various methods we've looked at will help you to do this. There will still be crisis points. Unfortunately, we can't always avoid that. Sometimes we know something is going to happen, but it's just not possible to stop it. At crisis points, at least until we can work out strategies to prevent or reduce the behaviours, what will we do? So we need to support them appropriately. So in these absolute times of crisis, when we haven't been able to avoid it and we've reached meltdown, we should stay calm, be positive and quiet, and use a low arousal approach. We don't want to overload the child. In a crisis point, a child has reached their limits, and they may be sensory overloaded, and we need to bear that in mind when trying to resolve the situation. So stay calm, be positive and quiet, and use a low arousal approach. Don't bring them back up, let it come down. Do use the child's name to get focus. It may not be obvious, it may be obvious to us, but not obvious to the child that we are talking to them. So use their name to get their attention and their focus. Avoid touching the child unless there's safety issues. If a child's thrown themselves in the middle of a walkway and they're going to get trampled on because it's lunchtime, we may need to touch the child. But avoid touching the child. Again, in crisis time, they are overloaded, and this could be sensory linked, and touching them can start the issues and the anxieties all over again. So just avoid touch. Have as few people as possible involved, one person ideally, unless it's particularly dangerous. The more people there are, the more stimulation and sensory input, and this won't necessarily help the situation. So it's best to stay at one person, have one person in charge, and then maybe have another nearby on call if they're needed. But that should only be rare situations. Remove from the situation where possible. If you know being in a particular room is adding to the anxieties and causing more of a challenging behaviour, can you go away from that room? Are there children around them making too much noise, which is affecting the anxiety and making the situation worse? Can you remove the other children? Everything has to remain safe, so we don't want to be moving anyone that's then going to get hurt or cause the situation to become more dangerous, but we need to bring everything down as low and as calm and as sensory input reduced as possible. Use minimal words. Now this is something that can be really difficult in an early years environment. We are naturally language rich. There's lots of talking and there's lots of explanation for what we do. But in times of crisis, the more language we use, the more anxiety we can build. We've already established, due to the areas of difference, that children with special educational needs and disabilities may not be processing information in the same way. And if the more we talk and the more we say, we could be over confusing them. There's too much information for them to process at a time when they're already overloaded. So use really minimal words. Single word prompting if necessary. Use a symbol if you feel it's appropriate. But don't give them lots and lots of language and conversation because it may not help. Don't ask them to explain what's going on. Don't ask them to explain what's happened or how they're feeling. Don't tell them off and reprimand them. Don't ask for reasoning, because right now, in the middle of crisis, they can't process what you're asking. So give everything time to calm. While we're working out what's going on, we need to reduce stress as much as possible. So we've already got our charts and everything set up, and we're going to be looking and monitoring at what's going on and what could be upsetting the child, what they're trying to communicate with us. But how do we reduce stress while we're working this out? So some key things to remember are to be one step ahead. Consider and address all the likely triggers. So if we know that not having a coat that day is going to upset that child and they've come in without a coat, can we find a spare coat? Will that help? Changes to expected plans. If you have planned to go outside and do some bug hunting in your mud kitchen or something, and it's snowing and you can't get out, that's going to be a change to your plan that could really upset the child if they've been expecting it. So how can we anticipate that? What can we do about it? Can we change a timetable? Can we let parents know the day before? Can we do something else to replicate it? We need to expect this change as much as we possibly can. We know that this change is going to upset this child. What can we do about it beforehand? The environment. So again, bearing in mind the areas of difference and the way children process information, is the environment sensory overloaded? Have we got lots of noise? So it can be quite difficult in a mainstream environment in early years, because it is naturally, according to the EYFS, very colourful. There's lots going on, there's lots of choices. We want to give children lots of information, but this can be too much for children with needs. So is there too much hanging from the ceiling? Have you got displays on every piece of available wall? Are these all multicoloured? These are things that could possibly overload a child. So is it possible for you to find a little corner somewhere that you can make much plainer? Maybe put up a little tent where it's all calm and it's all quiet, something different. Again, the communication rich environments, this is very much part of the EYFS, but this can be quite difficult for children with needs who aren't processing information in the same way as they're typically developing peers. So can you implement symbols in your environment so that you don't have to use quite so much language when communicating with them? Have as many of these things ready as possible beforehand. So be that one step ahead. If you know you have a child with language difficulties coming in, can you put in place symbols ready for their start? So think about the people. They may have a usual one-to-one, and that one-to-one isn't going to be there that day. How can we tackle that? What can we do in advance? Does the child use a visual timetable? Can you put the picture of who's supporting them that day on the visual timetable to help? If you know that person's not going to be there, if you know that person isn't going to be there, can you warn them the day before? Often the change is what is difficult to cope with. So if we can preempt the change, we can cope with the difficulties a little bit more. Are the tasks appropriate? Is it something that the child is going to be able to achieve? If the child isn't going to be able to achieve it, is that going to cause stress? So can we therefore change the task? Do we have pens that are working and pencils that are sharpened? If these need doing when the child sits down to do the task, it could cause more anxiety because they can't get on with what they want to do. Make sure all these things are ready beforehand. And then other individual factors. So you know your children, the parents know their children. Everything should be a two-way communication. Do we know things for this particular child that we can change in advance? Do we know that they can only sit on a blue chair? So have you got a blue chair? Can we put a blue spot on the chair to help? And then on a bad day, because we all have bad days. Even as adults, we have bad days. We need to adjust our expectations and then provide support. So we need to make things, we're aiming for the best possible outcome at all times. So what can we do to make sure today is just a good day? So it's important to promote positive behaviours. We're looking at the challenging behaviours, but how do we promote the positive behaviours? Because ultimately this will reduce the challenging behaviour. Remember, if you're going to use rewards, they should be clear. If you have a house point system, for example, is it really relevant to your child with special educational needs and disabilities? Do they understand what they're working for? Often with things like house point systems or golden time, it's not an immediate reward. This is something that they're going to get a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks down the line. Is that relevant to them? Do they understand what they're working for? Is a trophy at the end of the school year very motivating for a child with special needs? So some reward systems that we might consider using, you may have sticker charts in your room. Not all children will respond to stickers, but some will. These are 2 suggested reward systems. So the first picture is one of a football, and we have 2 laminated symbols, and then we cut the top symbol into pieces. So you would cut this into as many pieces as you feel your child can cope with. That may be that you cut it in half, so they just have 2 pieces, and then you can cut that again as they start to understand. Immediately the child does something good, they get 1 piece of their puzzle, which is then velcroed onto the second symbol. And once they've built up that picture and completed their puzzle, they get that reward. So it's fairly clear to the child, it's instant that they get their piece, and then once it's all been achieved, they get to go out and play football for 5 minutes. You might need to use a timer to make this particularly relevant. And then the other picture here is using the computer. So this is working towards. So the puzzle pieces is perhaps better for some types of children, while other children will understand again in tokens towards a reward. So in this one you would earn coins or smiley faces, and when you have the designated amount, you receive your reward. You may have several different versions of this, so you may have a football and a computer and the iPad and painting, and then the child can choose their reward, choose what they're working for. And it is important to remember that a reward should be something that the child is working for. It's not something that they're going to get anyway. There's very little motivation in receiving the computer if everyone is going to play on the computer at the same time. If this is part of your daily activities and everyone is going to do it, why are they working towards it? So a reward should be something extra, something they are working towards getting. It's very important, considering the areas of difference and how children process and receive and respond with communication, we need to facilitate communication wherever we can. So visual cues are really, really good ways to do this. There's several options here to look at. So one is to use a key ring, although this is quite an old picture now, so often people now have symbols on lanyards around their neck because we carry those all the time. Do remember, if you're carrying symbols on a lanyard, to have the most significant symbols that you are going to use most often. There's no point in having 20 symbols on a lanyard that you're then going to spend 2 or 3 minutes flicking through to find the one you want, and then the behaviour or whatever it is you're trying to communicate has changed in the time it's taken you to find the symbol. So on a lanyard, stick to things like good sitting, help, toilet, things that you're going to want very quickly. We've also got pictures at the top on the right, a visual timetable. Now this might not be appropriate in nurseries. In nursery environments it can be quite hard to have a timetable, but it's more appropriate perhaps for a reception class where there is a little bit more structure especially when we're thinking about moving on a child to year 1, where there will be much more structure. So often I think it's a good idea to implement a visual timetable towards the end of reception to help with the transition into year 1 anyway. With a visual timetable, you should remove the symbol as the activity is finished, so that we know it's done, that's finished, we're on to the next thing. A child should be as active in this as they possibly can. Encourage a child to remove a symbol. In the early years, a timetable may be a little bit more difficult because the subjects are not structured the same way, but you could have a choosing timetable. The activities that are out, what is the child going to choose? They select that symbol and they go and play with that activity. Sometimes they need that structure to help them understand expectation. And then at the bottom we have a first and then board. Now this is very appropriate for nursery and reception children when we're trying to get them to follow routines. First we're going to do this activity and then we're going to do something else. The then, to begin with, the then option is preferable to be something that they want, something motivating. So first we're going to do some writing and then you can go and play with the dolls, the trains. So we've really nearly reached the end of our webinar now, and to finish up, I'd like you to think about the behaviours in your setting. So we've been thinking about them all the way along, but now is your task. Think about those behaviours in your setting, consider the iceberg, and then use one of the recommended tools to analyse the behaviour. Can you work out what is really going on? Can you find a pattern? Can you keep that chart and work out what it is that they're trying to tell you? And then create a plan and strategies to minimise the stress and reduce the stress, and promote positive behaviours. So this is your task. Think about a child, think about the behaviours, use the tools we've discussed to work out what's going on, and then create a plan to minimise those and promote positive outcomes. So if you need to contact us for anything, you can reach me, Nicola Robson, at n.robson@whitefield.waltham.sch.uk. I'm happy to provide you with copies of those charts that we showed, the ABC and the frequency chart. And then finally, any further training is available here on these websites. Please do pop along and have a look and contact early years with any additional needs. Thanks.